Hey there, Rappies. Rapper9198 here, and welcome to another edition of Ryan's Day Reading. So today I'll be reading chapter 13 of I'll Push You, titled The Lies We Tell Ourselves. So a little recap from the previous chapter. I know that they met some new friends, Christy, John, and Linda, and Justin and Patrick's other friend, Ted, is getting ready to leave to go back to Idaho. So, but here they've made it to Nahara, as you can see here on the map here. So this is 199 kilometers. I don't know if you can see that, but they're still not halfway there, but they have made it quite a good ways. But now they have to say goodbye to Ted, who has played such a significant role in their journey up to that point. So here we go with chapter 13, and we start from Justin's perspective. Today is an emotional day. As Patrick and I head toward Belorado, accompanied by our new friends, Christy, John, and Linda, Team Ted is getting ready to return to Idaho. And just in time, over the past 48 hours, his limp has increased and he is visibly in pain. Even so, Patrick and I are reluctant to see him go. Ted has been instrumental to our journey in so many ways. With his impending departure, we realize how much he has sacrificed to help us when we needed it most. The past 10 days have been filled with so many memories: the mud, the false summits in the Pyrenees, the broken wheel in Pamplona, Patrick checking out a man in a dress, traversing poppy fields, running with bulls, eating dinner with the other pilgrims. Ted helped create each of these memories. Starting today, every Camino story will be one that Ted isn't a part of. This is tough to swallow, but though he may not be with us from here until the end, the days up until now have made every day in the future possible. I suppose life is this way. The events of our past and the relationships that have gone before make new things possible, good or bad. Ted starts the day walking with us for one last stretch of the Camino, but after a few hours, his part of the journey has officially come to an end. When Robin finds an access point where he can get his car close to the trail, we all stop for a round of goodbyes. Patrick locks the brakes to my chair, unclips from the harness behind me, and gives Ted a bear hug filled with more gratitude than any words could ever express. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything you've done. Releasing Patrick, Ted smiles. You bet. He then comes over to me and bends down to wrap his arms around my shoulders. I often miss being able to return hugs, but never more than I do right now. Love you, brother, I whisper to him. As he walks toward the car, he turns to face us. Love you guys. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. With one last wave to everyone in the group, Ted crawls into Robin's car with his backpack and is on his way to the airport. The dynamic of our group has suddenly shifted. One of the most familiar faces in our lives is gone, and we're now accompanied by 3 people we hardly know. But there is a certain mystery to the Camino, one that often turns complete strangers into friends by the end of the day. The combination of being completely unplugged from the stresses of work, computers, and phones causes some kind of mental reboot. With no meetings, no projects, and no commitments, people tend to open up and provide details of their lives you wouldn't normally expect to hear after just meeting. 8 hours of walking together provides ample time for sharing. In addition to the abundance of quality time and minimal distractions, people on the Camino tend to be seekers of openness and honesty. They embrace a community in which relationships are treasured. This is an environment where pilgrims feel safe. For some reason, Christy has found that safe place with me. So Christy, tell me about yourself, I say as she begins pushing me down the trail. I don't know where to start, she stammers. After a moment of thought, she decides to start at the beginning, zeroing in on the darkest and most painful moments of her childhood. This soon leads to stories of self-destructive tendencies. As a young girl, she struggled with crippling fears and insecurities and developed an eating disorder. She suffered temptations towards self-harm and became suicidal. Over time, Christy allowed her identity to be swallowed by the darkest experiences of her childhood. She could only see herself through the lenses of her depression, fears, and insecurities. She believed so many lies about who she was and who she is that she couldn't see through them to recognize the amazing God-breathed creation she was meant to be. For the first time, I am beginning to see there is more to me than my past, she says as she continues to push me. I think I'm here to let go of a lot of my darkness. For years, I have locked away the pain, but here on the Camino, I'm learning to tell a different story. These horrible things may have happened to me, but they will not define me. As Christy continues to push me at a steady rate, I tell her, "You're right. The past doesn't have to define us, but we can't face it alone." And now we go to Patrick's perspective. Listening to Christy's openness and honesty with Justin, I am flooded with memories of my own self-destructive tendencies. I had a very privileged childhood. We were never wealthy. In fact, we were quite poor. But my sister and brothers and I were always loved, taken care of, and never went hungry. Justin and his brother and sister grew up in similar circumstances. Our homes were safe places, and our parents set a good example for us. Unfortunately, this didn't mean I was immune to the world's destructive forces. Every child is bound to have a brush with some form of pain, whether initiated by an outside force, such as abuse or neglect, or by some other unhealthy choice. We all, at some point, have made decisions that negatively impact us. For me, this started very young. The first time I saw a picture of a naked woman, I was 7 years old. I was playing in the backyard at a friend's house when we heard the sound of his dad's car pulling out of the garage. As his dad drove away, my friend asked me if he could show me a secret. Intrigued, I followed him inside. We walked up the stairs to his parents' room, and he slid open a closet door. Inside, we found his dad's collection of Playboy and Penthouse magazines. There were stacks of literally hundreds of them, many dating back to the 1970s. Eyes wide with curiosity, I began to thumb through the images. Not knowing what to expect, my curiosity soon became insatiable. A sense of guilt washed over me, but that was quickly stifled by a more powerful draw. What comes next? Over the next several months, my friend and I kept track of which magazines we had looked through so we could get to the ones we had yet to see. This exploration of the female anatomy continued off and on over the next several years. By the time I was 9, some of the images in the newer magazines depicted explicit sex. Nothing was left to the imagination. My initial curiosity wasn't sexual in nature. After all, I was only 7, but by the time I was in middle school, I thought about pornography constantly. My ideas of what a man and a woman should be to one another, how they should treat each other, had been heavily influenced by the love and respect my parents showed each other. But a dark and deceptive voice was growing louder. When I was 13, I smoked marijuana and drank alcohol for the first time. I enjoyed the way they both made me feel. My mind felt free and boundless each time I got high. Often when I wasn't with Justin, I would go for walks to smoke a joint, or I would seek out parties or gatherings where weed and booze were likely to be available. Sometimes these parties included pornographic movies. By the time I was in high school, I had a few adult films on VHS stashed away in my bedroom under my mattress or at the back of one of my drawers. They often sat next to a bag of green buds waiting to be rolled into joints or stuffed into a bomb. I found ways to get high as often as I could, and eventually I struck a deal with a few guys in town to deliver weed for them in exchange for a free supply for myself. I experimented with other drugs, but marijuana was always my first choice. Throughout high school, I often had some weed in my possession, and though Justin knew about my drug use, I rarely did anything around him. Not because he looked down on me, but he was just never particularly drawn to it himself. Pornography, however, was another story. All right, now we go back to Justin. Second grade should be a time when kids learn how to write stories and master addition and subtraction, rather than being exposed to pornography. I was a smart kid and had no problem with second grade math or writing, but my mind was often filled with images of naked women. A boy in my class had stolen a magazine from his dad's collection, and our curiosity about the female body drove us to pursue the images with some frequency. Though it seemed innocuous at first, and my understanding of what I was seeing was limited, a quiet longing to see more was growing in my mind. With the turn of each page, I became more thoroughly intoxicated by the airbrushed beauty depicted there. By the time I turned 12, I had a pocket calendar of topless women hidden in my room. But that wasn't enough. I felt a growing desire to see more, a hunger that was hard to explain and even harder to satisfy. By early high school, what I was seeing in those explicit magazines was undermining what my parents had taught me about how women should be treated and respected. Every picture and every lustful thought polluted my view of my female friends, fellow students, and later, my coworkers. I explained away my compulsive desire, telling myself, it's okay, it's human nature to be attracted. But in convincing myself that what I was experiencing was normal, I was giving the secret I carried more weight and more control. Every time I sought to satisfy my need, I could feel the grip of pornography tightening. The tighter the grip, the darker the secret. The darker the secret, the more power my addiction had over me, and the greater my need. For years, both Patrick and I struggled with this addiction independently. We were in college before we knew about each other's struggles, and it would be several more years before we reached the level of honesty and vulnerability we are experiencing here on the Camino. Christy's struggles may differ. The lies she's believed are not the same ones I've believed, but I see a common thread. Christy, Patrick, and I have all exchanged truth for lies. Christy is walking into this realization afresh. All right, and now we go back to Patrick. With the sun high above us, I am now pushing Justin, and Christy is walking alongside. We continue our conversation, exploring questions of self-worth and our thoughts on overcoming the struggles of life. We all agree that we must embrace the truth that no matter what we have done or what has been done to us, we all have value and can choose to be a part of creating a community that offers safety and love. Turning to Justin, Christy asks, do you think there's a difference between this kind of community and church? Justin mulls over her question before answering. Community like this is what church is meant to be. What it should be, Justin says, but unfortunately, it is often not what church is. What does church mean to you, Patrick? Christy asks. If I'm honest with myself, church is what we have been experiencing for the past several miles. But how do I best express this? I think I want to start with what it's not, I say. As I pause to gather my thoughts, the sound of our steps seems to drive the words into my mouth. Church is not a building for worship or a place to learn theories about religious doctrine. It's not about why we are right and they are wrong, or how to talk to those people. Okay, so what is it then? It is an existence grounded in loving God and loving others, regardless of race, creed, sexual preference, or one's history of pain, abuse, or addiction, and drawing them into the truth. What truth? She asks. The truth that God's love is more powerful than any darkness we can face. And I totally agree with that, honestly. Jesus painted a picture, time and time again, of a group of individuals in community with one another, living life together, facing the problems of the world together, loving together without an agenda, or putting the needs of others above their own. For many, myself included, church has been reduced to a place to go for a couple of hours on Sunday morning, instead of being a vibrant community of people committed to living life together, committed to loving one another. But here on the Camino, I am discovering a new appreciation for a different kind of church. The church Jesus called us to live, not one we simply attend. Don't get me wrong, I find value in going to church, in quotes, but I often feel as if the church has been reduced to a club with exceptionally high acceptance standards, where everyone who is a member has been forced to lie on their application just to get in. Too often, I've seen a refusal to be real with one another and to invite others into our pain because we are afraid we won't meet the criteria created by man, not by God. So many people today do church by going through the motions and checking the boxes. As a result, religion takes precedence over relationship. Here with Christy, relationship is in the driver's seat, and her openness reminds me of the beauty that exists when love is lived out. Jesus calls us to live this way, to live in relationship with one another, to live in community with one another, a community the Apostle Paul has a few choice words to say about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, often referred to as the love chapter. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than it does for itself. Love is not proud or boastful and does not force itself on others. Love is slow to anger and does not keep score of the sins of others. Love does not take joy in the suffering of others. Love finds pleasure in the truth. Quite simply, this is how we're supposed to live our lives. The result is a community where all feel welcome and safe, a place where healing can occur, an existence we are all called to live. Christy's openness and vulnerability remind me of a lesson I learned at an age much older than hers. Her pain, guilt, and suffering wielded incredible controlling power over her while it was kept secret. Each time she shares her story, though, a little more light shines inside the closet where her skeletons reside. The more light she lets in, the fewer shadows there are for those skeletons to hide within. Eventually, the light will become so strong, so intense, that those skeletons will be reduced to ash. What Christy experienced as a child will never be miraculously taken away. But the power those experiences have over her are being transferred into her hands. She is choosing how those memories, combined with all the life she has lived since, will become a part of her identity. Have I taken control of my own darkness? My porn addiction and drug use, my porn addiction and drug use are not things I'm proud of, but I don't shy away from their existence. At least not anymore. For years, I stuffed the guilt and shame away in my own closet. But the more I kept these things hidden, the stronger they became. Pornography, in particular, drew me deeper into depravity, enveloping my every waking thought. I would try to fight the addiction alone, and I would win for a while. But it always came back, and when it did, it was stronger than before. For the longest time, I would be honest about what I was doing and what I was seeing, but only when I was caught. I guess that isn't really being honest. But when I began to tell others about my addiction, the control seemed to loosen its grip, and the weight of the load I was carrying became a little lighter. I invited my wife into that conversation. I invited Justin into that conversation. And now I am inviting Christy into that conversation, the way she has invited us into her story. As a result, I find freedom in their knowing all of me and still choosing to love me. It wasn't easy. I was fearful and worried that others might judge me and think less of me or cast me aside as unworthy. But the opposite happened. When I shared with those whom I trusted, with those who made me feel safe, I realized I wasn't alone. We all struggle. We all have some form of darkness in our lives, past or present. But even though these shadows or stains are a part of our story, they don't have to define us. When we invite others into our world, when we surround ourselves with a community of trusted individuals, we are able to share like Christy has been sharing, and we begin to realize we're not alone in our suffering, and we're not alone in life. Our stories begin to take on a different shape. They are filled with hope. Soon, the beauty of our relationships outweighs the darkness of our pasts, and people like Ted and Christy can help us create new memories as we continue to write our stories. The Camino is filled with people who are dealing with something, searching for a safe place to face their demons. How different would the world be if every church offered that safe place? All right, and that's it for chapter 13. Oh my gosh, that's again such another powerful, positive message in that chapter alone. And again, I feel like all this was meant to happen to them. And I think another thing is that, whatever struggles, that you may have gone through, it can make you stronger in the future. Like, I think it's another thing with me, with my autism, like, I know it's not the greatest example, but I think with me, I tend to be very reclusive. Like, I'm not like, I know, especially when I was a kid, as I said before, when I was in preschool, I was so anxious about even being with all the other kids. Like when we had our little choir concerts, like the spring sing, which you guys, I have the video here on my channel, but it's just, I remember feeling so anxious. I couldn't move at all, even though even though I was, on stage with all the other fellow kids. But now, like something, I don't know what happened, but then I suddenly just kind of developed a little interest in performing there, and I was able to, and then I eventually had the nerve to actually do the Bethel's Got Talent for 2 years in a row when I was at Bethel in college, and that's where I first, because Patrick and Justin actually came to Bethel when I was there, and that's when I first heard about their story, and that's where I got this book, and also the other ones that they wrote that they were a part of, which I will also read, because I also read the Push. It was that children's book. And then there's another book that they wrote called Imprints, The Evidence Our Lives Leave Behind, which I'll get to after this book, actually. So, but it's just so amazing how God works like that. Like, I like that I was introduced to their story like this, and I'm also actually reading this for the first time. Believe it or not, if I'm to be honest with you. So I like that I'm kind of actually reacting to it at the same time you guys are. I don't know who has heard or who hasn't, but for those, just for everybody, if you have heard their story or not, it's like it carries so many powerful messages, powerful and positive messages. Like, this is a story, like this needs to be heard around the world, and I like that what they think about church is more than just a building to go to, as a place to go to worship God, or a building to go for a couple of hours like that. It should be occurring all the time, like 24/7, 365 days a year. It should be an ongoing thing like that. And see, because I like that how I think it's also a God thing there too, that that now Christy, that they've all come together and now they're sharing things with each other. So that's really, I think, how community starts. And it's just so, it's just so powerful, and it's so inspiring, powerful, positive. I don't know, words of that sort that describe it. Like, words can't really define how great it is. And again, that's why I say this book I highly recommend it, because it just carries so many great messages. And it's something that I think really needs to be passed down to future generations to make, help. And I think that would definitely help make the world a better and safer place. Alrighty, well, Rappies, thank you very much. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And then stay tuned for next time as we go into chapter 14, The Ridiculous and the Absurd. So, I can't wait to see what's coming up next, now that they don't have Ted around anymore and they have Christy and John and Linda with them. All right. Thank you, Rappies, again very much. Love you all to death. God bless. And I'll see you next time. All right. Bye.